Hi, welcome to SBR Sports Picks. I'm Peter Loshak. Today is July 24th, and I'm going to be previewing the Big 12 right now, going over each team and discussing some things that I'm going to be looking for from each team in terms of possible betting value in the upcoming season. And let's start with Baylor. Of course, Baylor, a very, very interesting team this year, going through a huge program reboot, obviously, new coaching staff, turnover in their personnel, and Matt Rule is going to be the coach. He comes over from Temple. We have to assume that obviously this version of Baylor is going to be very, very different from what we've seen in years past. It's not going to be the huge explosive offense. It's going to be much more similar to what we saw Temple run. There's going to be more running, more tight ends, more of a pro style offense. And so how will that play out on the field? I'm going to be thinking that we might see unders from Baylor, even though the market is drastically going to reduce their totals. The defense should be better. They return a lot of experience at every position except cornerback. They have a new defensive coordinator, Phil Snow, who is probably going to get a lot out of the players. So I'm expecting the offense to be a lot more conservative, the defense to be pretty good, and that might translate into unders for Baylor, even though, again, the market is definitely going to be reducing their totals significantly. They might not reduce it enough. And then as far as ATS is concerned, it's going to be kind of a crapshoot as to it's going to be very uncertain as to how Baylor will do with their current personnel under the new system. Their starting 22 is great. Their big problem, though, is that they don't have a lot of depth all over the field. So I'm thinking we might see some surprise covers from Baylor early on, and then later on in the season when they get more banged up and depth becomes an issue, they might start to wear down and be a good fade. But at least to start the season, I'm looking for maybe unders from Baylor and looking for maybe Baylor to be a little bit undervalued and maybe to have some value, considering that their coaching staff is pretty impressive, and that their starting 22 is great. Then moving on to Iowa State, it's the second year in the Matt Campbell era, and Iowa State's an interesting team this year. It's been a while since they've had this much talent in the skill position. Run defense, though, is their big weakness, and I have to assume that until further notice, we can assume that run defense is going to continue to be a weakness for Iowa State and to hold them back. But their offense might be more explosive than we've seen in quite a while from Iowa State. So I'm thinking about that they might actually be a good bet on the over. I'm also thinking that Iowa State improving and a little bit undervalued might cover more games than they'll lose ATS, and particularly against teams that won't be able to gash them in the running game. So I'm thinking that maybe when they face subpar rushing teams, they might be a good bet on and a good bet for an ATS cover. And in general, I am looking for overs with Iowa State. I think their offense will be further ahead than their defense will be this year. And so in general, I'm looking for overs with Iowa State, at least to start the year, and looking for them to cover more games than they'll lose ATS, and particularly for them to cover against teams with subpar rushing games. And then moving on to Kansas. Of course, Kansas has been a pathetic team for many years in a row. They are making some improvements, though. They're installing a new air raid offense. They do have some talented receivers. I think they might be able to score a bit more than we've seen from them in the past. The defense, should have a good pass rush, but they lose a ton in the secondary. They should still be bad against the run. So I'm looking at their defense as probably very weak again. And as far as ATS is concerned, they might be a little bit undervalued depending on how the market rates them. But I'm thinking that they might actually be a good bet on their overs. I think that their defense is going to give up points early, at least until the secondary makes some improvements. If the secondary doesn't make any improvements, then they'll give up points the whole year long. And they might improve on offense a little bit to at least be undervalued on their totals and be a good bet on the over. We'll see what their spreads are. But for now, to start the year with the new offense and the defense vulnerable as ever, I'm looking at overs for Kansas to start the year. Then Kansas State, it's looking like a very strong season on tap for Kansas State. The 2 years that they were ranked in the preseason, top 25 recently, they did also then go on to have awesome years ATS. And Kansas State is looking very strong. They returned 6 starters from a defense that was very strong last year. And of course, the offense might be way great. They have a great quarterback returning, Jesse Ertz. They returned 8 starters on offense, and the offensive line should should be great as well. So overall, they're also stronger than normal at receiver. So their offense might be even more dynamic than we're used to seeing. Usually Kansas State does well with a relatively conservative offense, but it may be less conservative this year. The defense should be strong as always. The only real issue here is Coach Snyder's health. Of course, he has some unfortunate health issues, and it's not clear exactly how much of a factor that will be. It does seem like Kansas State is now just a machine that rolls on its own, but it is a question mark, Snyder's health and how much his role will be limited and how much that'll affect the team. But in general, Kansas State's looking very strong to me this year. Of course, they are going to be ranked highly this year, and so the markets are going to be onto them, but maybe not quite as much as they should be, especially early on. So I'm looking for Kansas State to maybe be a good bet ATS to start the year and maybe even all season long. Then with Oklahoma, of course, there was a surprising retirement of Bob Stoops, but they returned a ton of talent. Obviously, the offensive line is going to be a huge plus, and of course, Baker Mayfield is a huge plus as well. The issue, though, with Oklahoma is that they rarely, when expectations are high for Oklahoma, the market usually either, appropriately prices them or even overvalues them. They don't quite, it's not guaranteed that they're going to have the weapons on the skill positions on offense that they have had in the past. Obviously, again, the offensive line is going to be super strong, and Baker Mayfield is what he is. If he gets injured, then there might be some bigger question marks that come into play. But to start, expectations are high for Oklahoma, but they're probably going to be appropriately valued. I do think that the defense might actually wind up being a lot better than expected, and if that's the case, then Oklahoma may actually wind up covering some of their big favorite spreads, but we'll see. For now, it's sort of a wait-and-see approach that I'm taking with Oklahoma. We'll see quite how high the market values them this year. It's possible that Oklahoma could be awesome, but still just 50-50 ATS because the market gives them so much respect on their lines. Then with Oklahoma State, I'm thinking we might just see overs from Oklahoma State, even though the market knows that they have a relatively weak defense and a ton of firepower on offense. The totals for Oklahoma State games are going to be high for sure, but they might not quite be high enough. Mason Rudolph is awesome. Ton of weapons on offense, and the defense might be a big liability, especially at cornerback. So they might be able to be passed on very easily. They might be very weak in their pass defense, and if that's the case, we might see some absolute shootouts with Oklahoma State, and Oklahoma State games going over even with very, very high posted totals. That's what I'm going to be looking for, at least to start the year with Oklahoma State. And then with Texas, of course, it's the first year in the Tom Herman era. We'll see how things shake out. I think Charlie Strong, in some respects, got a raw deal. Texas returns a lot of talent this year, and Herman's going to be the beneficiary of that, and particularly on defense. I think that Texas is going to take a big step up defensively. They never really put it together under Charlie Strong, but they definitely have a lot of talent returning on defense, and I'm expecting a big step forward on defense. And offensively, it depends on how Buechele at quarterback goes. He was great at the start of the year in his freshman year. At the end, though, he definitely regressed, and it's not clear what we're going to get from Buechele this year. But in general, I'm a believer in Texas in the upcoming season. I'm a believer in Herman and his ability to make the most of what he has in terms of returning talent. And there is, because of Charlie Strong, a lot of returning talent this year for Texas. I believe they returned 17 starters. So I'm going to be looking for Texas maybe to be a good bet, ATS, at least to start the year. And I'm also thinking about unders in general on the year. I think that there might take a little bit of time for Herman's offense to gel, but I think that the defensive intensity will be kicking up right from week one. So I'm thinking about looking at unders for Texas and also maybe some ATS covers from them as well. Then looking at TCU. TCU is a very interesting team. They returned a ton of talent this year, but they have gotten kind of unlucky the past couple years and also just underachieved in general. A big question mark here is quarterback Kenny Hill. He's been kind of a frustrating quarterback, obviously shown flashes at times of being an elite-level quarterback, but also a lot of times vastly underachieving. He tends to do well in the beginning of the year and then fade late. So I'm thinking that TCU actually will start hot again. I'm willing to bet that that Kenny Hill at least starts the year well, if not the whole season. They have a very experienced offensive line, a valuable running game. The defense should improve. It might not be elite, but it should improve. So in general, I'm looking for TCU to have a strong start once again, and I'm thinking that I'll be looking to bet on TCU in the first third, maybe first half of the season. Then as the season wears on, maybe a reconsider. But I'm willing to bet that it's a bit of a bounce back year for TCU. I think that Hill will be good again to start the season. Defense should be improved, and I'm looking for TCU to cover some spreads, at least in the beginning of the season. Then for Texas Tech, I think it's just going to be basically more of the same for Texas Tech, more of the same. We know what to expect from them. Very, very vulnerable defense and a huge offensive passing game. The receiving core is loaded again. I think the offense is going to be as productive as ever. The defense might be a little bit better, which is not saying much, but it might be. And last year, Texas Tech's best defensive performances did come in the beginning of the year, so maybe we look for some ATS covers from Texas to start. But I think in general, was more of the same from Texas Tech. Overs, even with very high totals, and probably roughly 50-50 ATS wise. And then wrapping it up with West Virginia, this is another interesting team. Some people I've read are projecting West Virginia to be a top 25 team. I'm not quite buying it. Obviously, there's a lot of potential here, a lot of talent here. They could have a legitimately top 25 season, but I'm looking to fade West Virginia at least to start. A lot of question marks. Obviously, Greer at quarterback is one of the big ones. If he has an elite season, that will change things. But I'm not sure he's enough to push them over the top. I think their offense may get dialed up, especially to start. But I'm seeing a lot of question marks on defense. I think their defense is going to take a big step back, especially to start. And again, they just don't return a lot of production, and I think they're going to regress at least moderately on defense, maybe tremendously. And will the offense be able to keep up? Maybe so. But in general, I'm looking for overs from West Virginia, and I'm also looking for to fade them. I'm looking for ATS losses from West Virginia, looking for them to maybe be a little bit overrated and overvalued, despite obvious potential and strength in the roster. I'm just overall everything I'm seeing here, I'm not buying it. I'm going to expect West Virginia to at least start the year maybe being overvalued. And those are my thoughts for the Big 12 as of July 24th.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to our channel. Now, we've put a lot of work into producing all these free videos, so please help us out and keep all our content free for you forever by simply liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Now, not to mention, a visit to our industry-leading website will warm the hearts of all our SBR employees, especially myself. Now, the links are over there to the left, so do check those out. Thanks for watching.